At 82, Harrison Ford has nothing left to prove, and nothing left to hide. For the first time, the legendary actor is pulling back the curtain and naming the 7 co-stars he could never stand working with. From fiery clashes on set to bitter creative battles, these are the names that tested his patience, pushed his limits, and, by his own admission, turned filmmaking into pure hell. So who exactly made it onto Harrison Ford's secret hate list? Stay tuned, because you're about to uncover the top 7 actors Ford despised the most, along with the explosive behind-the-scenes stories Hollywood never wanted you to hear. Let's dive in. Shia LaBeouf. Shia LaBeouf. Few modern Hollywood feuds have felt as raw, or as revealing, as the clash between Harrison Ford and Shia LaBeouf. The stage: Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. The year: 2007. Ford, already a living legend at 65, was stepping back into his most iconic role nearly 2 decades after The Last Crusade. Opposite him was Shia LaBeouf, the volatile prodigy fresh off Transformers and Even Stevens, cast as Indy's son. Studio execs saw it as a bold passing of the torch. Fans weren't so sure. And on set, the tension was palpable. According to stunt coordinator Vic Armstrong, the friction started instantly. Harrison treats every scene like precision engineering, Armstrong recalled. Shia treated every moment like an emotional dig. From their first rehearsal, sparks flew. Ford's no-nonsense, meticulously controlled style clashed with LaBeouf's restless improvisation. Scenes meant to be sharp and measured veered into chaos, forcing Ford to halt takes in frustration. Producer Frank Marshall summed it up bluntly: "There's a difference between commitment to character and commitment to chaos, and Harrison won't enable the latter." The breaking point came during a crucial emotional scene. LaBeouf went off-script, pushing the moment into theatrical territory. Ford, known for his cool restraint, shut it down cold. Crew members later described it as a battle of philosophies, the master of control versus the firebrand of rebellion. But the feud didn't truly ignite until after the movie's release. In 2010, riding a wave of brutal honesty, LaBeouf openly trashed both himself and the film in interviews. "You get to monkey swinging and things like that, and you can blame the writer, blame Spielberg. But the actor's job is to make it come alive, and I couldn't. That's my fault," he admitted. Then came the real bombshell: Harrison wasn't happy with it either. "We had major discussions. The movie could have been updated. There was a reason it wasn't accepted." Ford, normally reserved to the point of silence, finally fired back. In Details magazine, he deadpanned, "I think I told him he was a FNG idiot. As an actor, it's my obligation to support the film without making a complete ass of myself." Still, Ford added a backhanded grace note: LaBeouf was ambitious, attentive, and talented, learning how to deal with a situation that's unique and difficult. Classic Ford, gruff, blunt, but with just enough ambiguity to keep people guessing. LaBeouf never hit back directly. But the damage was done. His relationship with Spielberg soured. His image unraveled: rehab, arrests, erratic performances. Years later, he admitted regret for burning bridges but never specifically apologized to Ford. And today, silence. No reconciliation. No red carpet reunion. When Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny was announced, LaBeouf's absence needed no explanation. It was simply expected. Ford moved on. The franchise moved on. Shia, for better or worse, moved on too. But if you're still wondering whether Harrison Ford holds a grudge, remember his final word on the matter: "To bite the hand that feeds you, it's bulls." Short, sharp, and devastating. Classic Harrison Ford. Tommy Lee Jones. Tommy Lee Jones. In Hollywood, some rivalries explode in public fireworks. Others smolder quietly, never boiling over, but impossible to ignore. The tension between Harrison Ford and Tommy Lee Jones on the set of The Fugitive belonged to the latter. On screen, they were electric, so electric, in fact, that their chemistry helped drive the 1993 thriller to nearly $370 million worldwide. But off-screen, it was frost, not fire. According to director Andrew Davis, Ford hesitated when he heard Jones had been cast. "I think Harrison thought, Tommy's a powerful actor. I don't want to be in his shadow," Davis recalled. And he wasn't wrong. Tommy Lee Jones was a storm, improvisational, spontaneous, unpredictable. Davis compared him to a jazz musician, shifting rhythms and emphasis with every take. Harrison Ford, by contrast, was the engineer, building scenes like finely tuned machines, every beat calibrated, every emotion measured. From day one, they were making two very different movies. The contrast came to a head during the iconic tunnel confrontation sequence. Jones's erratic line changes and offbeat reactions clashed with Ford's precision timing. It rattled him. Heated but controlled discussions followed, not screaming matches, but sharp, loaded conversations about professional courtesy and collaborative responsibility. Actors speak for, "You're stepping on my work." Ford, ever the pro, never gave the tabloids what they wanted. No interviews, no trash talk. But the chill was undeniable. Crew members noticed it instantly. "There was respect," one said, "but it was cold. Like two wolves circling, never breaking eye contact." Jones, of course, never acknowledged the tension. That was classic Tommy. He's never been one for diplomacy. He doesn't do politics, he does dominance. And maybe that's why the film worked so brilliantly. Ford's restrained desperation colliding with Jones's relentless, sardonic pursuit, it was combustible. Award season proved it. Jones walked away with the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. Ford got nothing. Director Davis admitted he was upset. Tommy got a lot of attention, but Harrison did a great job. "I think it's his best role." Ford said nothing, but insiders whispered he was deeply frustrated by the snub and by the way the spotlight had shifted from his movie to Jones's breakout triumph. The wound lingered. When U.S. Marshals, Jones's spin-off, went into production in 1998, Ford was conspicuously absent. He never returned to that universe, never even acknowledged the sequel. And for a franchise man like Harrison Ford, that silence speaks volumes. Sean Young. Sean Young. If you've ever watched Blade Runner and felt a strange unease during the so-called romantic scenes between Rick Deckard and Rachel, you weren't imagining it. That tension wasn't just acting, it was the echo of something real, something volatile simmering behind the camera. On screen, it looked like a fractured love story. Off-screen, it was a psychological standoff between Harrison Ford and Sean Young. Two actors locked in an uneasy, combustible dynamic that turned a sci-fi masterpiece into one of Hollywood's most complicated feuds. For Ford, the consummate professional who thrived on restraint and discipline, working with Young in 1982 felt like stepping into emotional quicksand. She was method, immersive, relentless. To him, disruptive. Director Ridley Scott later admitted the trouble started almost instantly. "Sean lived in character," he said. Harrison, already exhausted from 50 straight nights of rain-soaked shooting, couldn't tell if he was talking to the actress or the replicant. And it wasn't meant as praise. The breaking point came with the pivotal love scene. What was written as a moment of intimacy spiraled into what cinematographer Jordan Cronenweth called the most awkward professional chemistry I've ever seen. Crew members stopped calling it a love scene. They joked, darkly, that it was the hate scene. The atmosphere was that toxic. Ford, usually discreet about behind-the-scenes conflict, later hinted at the ordeal. Working with Sean was like walking through a minefield. That was as close as he came to admitting how much it scarred the experience for him. Young, however, didn't hold back. In a blistering Variety interview years later, she claimed Ridley Scott had pursued her romantically, and, after she refused, retaliated by orchestrating the brutal awkwardness of that infamous scene. "It was like F*******, she said flatly. Her clashes weren't limited to Ford. She and Scott spiraled into mutual hostility that turned collaboration into combat. But with Ford, the damage was carved into every forced kiss, every tense glance, every frame that was supposed to whisper romance but instead screamed discomfort. And yet, out of all that friction came a masterpiece. Critics hailed the coldness between Deckard and Rachel as hauntingly fitting, never knowing it wasn't just art, it was reality bleeding onto film. The feud never exploded into lawsuits or headlines, but it never healed either. Ford and Young never reunited on stage, never shared a project, never reconciled. When Blade Runner 2049 premiered in 2017, Ford returned as Deckard. Young did not. Instead, a digital ghost of her younger self flickered briefly across the screen, silent, synthetic, eerie. Whether intentional or not, it felt like the final verdict. Artificial intimacy replacing the impossible real thing. To this day, Sean Young calls Blade Runner the role that defined her career, and the experience that nearly destroyed her. Ford rarely mentions her at all. And maybe that silence, more than the film, more than the feud, is the truest ending of their story. Julia Roberts. Julia Roberts. In Hollywood, not every boardroom fantasy turns into box office magic. Some pairings explode, others fizzle, and then there are the rare few that never even make it past rehearsal. Like the ill-fated attempt to bring together Harrison Ford and Julia Roberts in a romantic drama that collapsed before it ever hit theaters. On paper, it was a dream. Two of America's most bankable stars, each adored by audiences worldwide. Ford, the brooding, reluctant hero. Roberts, the luminous, infectious sweetheart. Studios thought it was a guaranteed goldmine. But the reality? Oil and water. From the first table reads, the clash was unmistakable. Not of egos, but of styles. Ford built his empire on restraint, on saying more with silence than words. Roberts thrived on expression, on radiance, on connection. She leaned in. He leaned away. Director Mike Nichols, who tried desperately to close the gap, described it perfectly. Julia's charm needs acknowledgement. Harrison's strength comes from what he withholds. They were playing the same song, but in different keys. Rewrites piled up. Rehearsals dragged on. Still, nothing clicked. Roberts needed a dance partner. Ford gave her a wall. During what was meant to be the film's emotional centerpiece, a tender love scene, legendary cinematographer Sven Nykvist said the absence of chemistry was so profound, it was almost mesmerizing. Behind the scenes, frustration boiled. Roberts confided to crew members, he was emotionally unavailable, even in character. I couldn't get anything from him. Ford, blunt as ever, fired back later. It felt like I was acting opposite a performance, not a person. It wasn't hostility. It was philosophy. For Ford, authenticity was stillness. For Roberts, it was energy. Together, they weren't combustible. They were incompatible. Two great actors trapped in different movies. The project limped on until the studio finally put it out of its misery. No scandal, no press release, just silence. Ford moved on to grittier roles. Roberts returned to the charm-driven fare that suited her best. To this day, they've never worked together, never spoken publicly about each other, never even shared a red carpet photo. As one producer summed it up, they didn't hate each other. They just didn't belong in the same frame. Ford carried gravity. Roberts floated. One looked inward, the other reached out. Their cinematic DNA simply refused to splice. So, was it a feud? Not exactly. It was something subtler, more haunting. Proof that sometimes the camera doesn't lie, it captures the truth. And the truth was simple. Harrison Ford and Julia Roberts were never meant to fall in love, not even on screen. Kevin Costner. Kevin Costner and Harrison Ford. It was almost Hollywood history, a grand Western epic that promised to unite two American legends. Instead, it became a silent duel of egos and visions, a clash so deep it killed the film before the first frame was shot. On paper, it was perfect. Ford, the veteran with that quiet storm of intensity, and Costner, the Oscar-winning cowboy philosopher who dreamed in sweeping landscapes. Two icons. One saddle. But that was the problem. Neither man could share it. From the start, creative control was the battlefield. Ford wanted intimacy, a slow, bruising character study about the psychological cost of frontier violence. What happens to a man when he's forced to kill again and again just to survive? He asked producers. Costner wanted something else entirely. Not brooding silence, but grandeur. The West demands big skies, big stakes, a story as vast as the land itself, he told early meetings. They weren't just making different films. They were living in different worlds. Producer Lawrence Kasdan summed it up. Harrison wanted to explore the scars on a man's soul. Kevin wanted to capture the myth of American expansion. Same script. Two different movies. As pre-production dragged on, the war grew pettier and sharper. Script drafts began to shrink one star's role while boosting the others. One version crowned Costner the heroic center. Another gave Ford endless monologues and cut Costner's arc to pieces. Screenwriter William Goldman later called it a creative death spiral, where every revision made reconciliation impossible. The breaking point came in a showdown whispered about in Hollywood to this day. Polite, but brutal. Ford, visibly frustrated, finally asked, "Do you even care about what this character has lost?" Costner didn't flinch. "You're trying to turn an epic into a therapy session." That was the death knell. No blow-ups, no storming out, just silence, and then cancellation. Agent Mike Oites, who repped them both, later said it best, "Two legitimate visions destroyed each other through sheer incompatibility and stubbornness." The aftermath was just as telling. Ford never touched another Western that resembled The Lost Project. Costner charged ahead, crafting his own frontier sagas, Open Range, and years later Yellowstone, where his vision reigned unchecked. Insiders whisper that Ford found Costner's work too polished, too mythologized, not enough soul. Costner, meanwhile, thought Ford was too inward, too brooding, suffocating the story instead of letting it breathe. Decades have passed. The two men have never worked together, never shared a stage, never even sat for the same panel. A Western that could have redefined the genre now survives only as legend, a ghost story of Hollywood, born not of failure, but of two towering artists who simply could not ride together. Brad Pitt. Brad Pitt. For Harrison Ford, a film was never just a paycheck, it was a covenant. A script wasn't lines on a page, it was a blueprint of character, depth, and discipline. He came from a generation where actors didn't just perform the role, they shaped it, fought for its integrity, and guarded it like sacred ground. So when a young Brad Pitt, then Hollywood's reigning matinee idol, stepped onto the set of The Devil's Own, not just as its star but as the creative force who had developed the project from the ground up, it wasn't simply a clash of personalities. It was a collision of philosophies. The tension wasn't tabloid chaos. No shouting matches, no overturned chairs. But those who were there say the air felt heavy, charged with creative friction. It was like watching two captains trying to steer the same ship in opposite directions, one insider recalled. Both men believed they were saving it from sinking. Pitt had poured years into shaping the story of a haunted IRA assassin, envisioning a film steeped in nuance, trauma, and moral ambiguity. When Harrison Ford signed on as NYPD Sergeant Tom O'Mara, he respected that vision, but he wanted more. He wanted his character to carry equal weight. "Bradicated character," Ford later told Esquire. "And I wanted a complication on my side, so it wasn't just good versus evil." Ford fought to insert that complexity, a subplot he devised himself, where his character witnesses a morally questionable shooting by a fellow cop. For Ford, it gave the role dimension, humanity. But for Brad, it shifted the film off course. Suddenly, there wasn't one vision, but two. "We didn't have a script Brad and I agreed on," Ford admitted. "Each of us had different ideas about it. Two stars, two visions, one ticking clock, and no unified script." Brad never lashed out publicly. He kept his frustration hidden behind quiet professionalism. But insiders say he felt blindsided. After fighting for years to bring The Devil's Own to life, now his co-star was reshaping its tone mid-production. When Harrison spoke to the director, Brad would go silent, one crew member remembered. You could see it in his eyes. He didn't feel heard. Still, neither man descended into gossip or sabotage. Their conflict played out not in explosions, but in silence, in subtle resistance. Years later, Ford himself reflected on the experience with honesty, and even admiration. "First of all, I admire Brad," he said. "He's a wonderful actor. A really decent guy. But it was complicated. For fans expecting a bitter Hollywood feud, this isn't that story. What happened on The Devil's Own was more compelling. Two actors, one forged in the grit of old Hollywood, the other embodying the intensity of modern stardom, struggling to make the same movie while walking very different roads. And in the end, there was no scorched earth, no lingering bad blood. Just respect, and the quiet acknowledgement of how hard that film had been. Ford would later say, "I like that movie. Very much." Brad Pitt never spoke harshly about it. In time, the sharp edges dulled, and what remained wasn't rivalry, just the memory of two men wrestling with art in its rawest, most stubborn form. Mel Gibson. Mel Gibson. At first glance, Harrison Ford and Mel Gibson looked like natural allies. Two box office giants, global action stars with commanding screen presence. But just beneath the surface, they couldn't have been more different. Ford built his career on quiet professionalism, an unwavering moral compass, and the same grounded integrity that defined his roles. Han Solo, Indiana Jones, Jack Ryan. On screen and off, Ford stood for something. Gibson, however, became Hollywood's paradox. A brilliant actor and filmmaker whose off-screen scandals slowly began to overshadow his on-screen triumphs. Braveheart, Lethal Weapon, The Passion of the Christ cemented his legacy, but his public outbursts and offensive remarks began to erode the trust of colleagues, and Ford took notice. The tension came to a head in the early 2000s during pre-production on an untitled high-stakes action thriller. For the first time, the two were set to share top billing. But instead of excitement, the project was consumed by friction. Gibson's controversies, explosive behavior, anti-Semitic comments, toxic clashes, created an atmosphere industry insiders described as untenable. Ford, usually discreet about his opinions, finally spoke behind closed doors. According to one executive, he said bluntly, "I won't share a set with someone whose conduct poisons the people I need to trust." Producer Jerry Bruckheimer later echoed the sentiment. Harrison works from mutual respect. Mel's controversies destroyed that baseline. The fallout spread quickly. Female leads dropped out. Cinematographers and editors quietly withdrew. What should have been a Hollywood blockbuster crumbled into dust. For Ford, this wasn't about politics. It was about decency. To him, filmmaking demanded trust, safety, and collaboration, and Gibson's behavior made that impossible. Gibson never addressed the feud directly, but when pressed in a 2011 interview, he fired back cryptically, "Some people are actors. Some think they're saints. I don't answer to either." The damage was permanent. The unnamed project was shelved. Ford walked away. Gibson wasn't recast. The two never worked together, never appeared side by side at premieres, press junkets, or award ceremonies. To this day, not a single photo of them exists. And when Ford was later asked about working with controversial actors, he didn't hesitate. "If someone's personal life walks into the room before they do, I don't have time for that. I have work to do." That was the end of it. Ford moved on. Gibson was left behind.